You're watching the Flourishing Introvert show. If you're an introvert with more to offer and are looking for ways to play to your strengths authentically, you're in the right place. With up to 50% of any population identifying as an introvert, if you're not one, you'll know one, but you may not understand what makes them tick. Watching this show will help you to build that understanding and consequently build better business and personal relationships. Many people don't find out until their mid-years that what makes them different is their introversion. So this show is also for you if you're curious about becoming the best version of yourself. Let's get started. Hello, welcome. Come on in, make yourself comfortable and join me for the next 20 minutes or so, maybe 30, as I get all up in my head, or not, because I'm exploring the tricky problem of decision making. Now, for those of you who've not met me before, I'm Joanna, the founder of Flourishing Introverts. And I imagine a world where people own their introversion with confidence, with pride, and with a lived experience of equity. And I can tell you that's not how things are right now. Just yesterday, I was with a large professional services firm talking about introverted leadership. And I can tell you from that very session that there were people who still doubted the fact that introverts made good leaders. So we don't have, as yet, a good experience of equity. I work with introverts who want to reach more of their potential, and I rattle the cages of organisations and educational establishments to highlight and shake out the extroversion bias that is frankly usually hiding in plain sight. So if you've been following along, you'll know that I've been in October looking at harvesting. In November, we're looking at letting go, based in a way on what follows a harvest. And as we begin to recognize the necessity and the benefits of letting go, one thing looms large, and looms large as a potential sticking point, and it is what to let go of. So let me take you back to the sorting out and sorting through that I recommended you undertake a few weeks back. It's likely that as a result of sorting through, you may have a few piles or bags of stuff that no longer bring you joy. So that bit is somewhat easier, because if we don't want those things, if we've already sorted through and sorted out, we know we want to let go of them. What's harder to decide to let go of are the intangibles, the unseens, the limiting beliefs, and the other niggles that you're hanging on to, but that you probably don't let anyone know about. They're kind of like your own little secret. So today I'm going to be sharing some hard-earned wisdom about how to make the decision about what to let go of. Because the easy decisions are easy. That's obvious in a way, isn't it? So that's not what we're focused on here. What we're focused on are those difficult decisions, the intangibles, maybe the things around our own, as I say, beliefs. As introverts, many of us are known for our reflective nature, which is all well and good. But when our reflection morphs into overthinking, we can then struggle to make decisions. I wonder if any of you feel like that. I know I have in the past and still do occasionally. But I remember working with one manager who seemed to be decision obsessed and would say frequently, any decision is better than no decision, just make a decision. I have to say that I struggled with that particular management style, as I was noticing the costs of ineffective decisions, and those costs were high both in financial and human terms. So that's not okay with me. One of the main reasons, I suppose, that I take a different approach to decision making is that I'm a big fan of Nancy Kline's work around the thinking environment. And her book, Time to Think, is a favorite on my shelf that I dip into regularly. It really sits well with my introverted nature and enables me to play to my strengths, whereas just making any decision seems to negate real thinking. Now, Nancy Kline talks about 10 conditions for a thinking environment, but I want to share 5 key ideas from her work that can be related to our decision making. As her ideas relate to team or group decision making, I've added my own insights to each as to how I think they apply to individual decision making. And just as a reminder, even with these things that are harder to let go of, we don't always need to make these decisions about what to let go of on our own. But we do need to be mindful of the other person's agenda if we involve them in that decision making. So the first of the factors of the ideas from Nancy Kline's work around a thinking environment is listening. And you know what a fan I am of talking about real quality, devoted listening. Kline emphasizes the importance of that deep, attentive, even empathic listening in order to create a thinking environment. As I say on many of my courses, many of us are taught how to read and how to write, but it's only later in life that often we learn how to really listen. And in the context of group decision making, this can mean actively listening to all stakeholders, considering their perspectives and giving them space to express their thoughts and ideas. That's all part of creating psychological safety anyway, isn't it? But I did say that I'd give my own kind of twist on things when it comes to individual decision making. So when it comes to me as an individual or personal decision making, I think this means listening to my heart, to my intuition or my gut, using my emotional intelligence, and also tuning into whatever higher guidance you choose. So for me, this is about listening with my whole being and not just kind of using my head, but really tuning in with my body. The second point that Kline talks about is the importance of asking generative questions. And she advocates for asking open-ended questions where the primary goal of the questioning is not to obtain specific factual information, but more to foster a deeper understanding, to encourage critical thinking, and to promote creativity. These are the types of questions so often asked by great coaches. And in decision-making, this approach can lead to a more creative and more insightful discussions. And they help individuals and groups explore different options and possibilities. So let's take this back then to an individual perspective. My question, I guess, here is, how good are you at self-coaching? How many of us are coaches but forget to self-coach or neglect? Maybe we don't forget, but we just neglect to self-coach. So it's about kind of asking ourselves those deeper questions to encourage our own understanding and critical thinking. Of course, it's easier if somebody else asks those questions, but we're more than capable of asking them of ourselves. And by critical thinking, of course, I'm not talking about falling under the spell of my Gladys, my inner critic, or whatever your inner critic is called, but it does lead nicely on to Kline's next point. So she talks about equity in dialogue. And again, remember, her point is around groups and teams. So she believes that everyone's contribution should be treated with equal respect in a thinking environment. So in the context of decision making, this can mean ensuring that all voices are heard and valued, regardless of hierarchy or status within an organization. When we apply this to our own individual decision making, I make sure that Gladys does get heard, my inner critic does get heard, but proportionately with some of my other sub-personalities. So with my inner advocate, my inner rebel, my inner sage, I need to hear from all of them. And all of those sub-personalities will have a different perspective. And I, as the chair of that particular board, preside over that. So I need to make sure they all have a voice, but nobody dominates. The fourth of Klein's points is around time to think, or a thinking environment, is freedom to think. And she's been quite vocal about the fact that thinking isn't really valued much, it seems, anymore. We've become human doers, you know, we have to do, not be. So her approach encourages individuals to think for themselves and not feel pressured or rushed. Thank you. Because as an introvert who does need to think things through before I reach a decision, pressurizing me, rushing me never leads to a good outcome. So in decision making, this can mean allowing sufficient time for reflection and discussion before reaching conclusions. Of course, if that's in a group environment. And for we introverts, with our think, say, think communication process, it's even more important. I find that sleeping on it is often a good strategy, and see how you feel when you wake up in the morning. But that comes with a word of warning, because it's important that we don't slip into overthinking or procrastination by sleeping on it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on. Last on Klein's list is one that I cherish: silence. Klein values the use of silence as a way to allow thoughts to develop and to create space for deeper thinking. In decision making, this can mean incorporating moments of silence into discussions to encourage that reflection. Yet there are those who clearly feel uncomfortable with silence and need to fill every moment that there is. I'm not one of those people. And if you're an introvert watching here, you're unlikely to be somebody who fills those silences either. I find it's often in silence that I connect better with those deeper aspects of myself and my true needs. Klein talks about how it's becoming harder to think for ourselves, and just consider for a moment the bombardment of social media. It seems everyone everywhere has an opinion about what we should do, whether or not they know anything about us or our situation. We know the world is full of keyboard warriors and meddlers and self-appointed experts. So we also need to bring our own discernment in here. And we also bring in our own use of emotional intelligence to make the difficult decisions. And things I'm particularly or specifically thinking of here are being aware of any biases or personal preferences that might be influencing my judgment. And all humans carry bias. We're delusional if we think we're completely unbiased. But most of us are educated enough not to act from those biases. But when I'm on my own, in my own decision-making process, those biases can play a big part. So I need to be aware of them. I need to practice emotional regulation in order to manage intense emotions that I might experience when thinking about what to let go of. You know, this, when we're looking at letting go of limiting beliefs, it's fascinating how tight we can hold on to those limiting beliefs. And it's not unusual either when faced with letting go of things we're emotionally attached to. I think it's also important that we gather all the relevant information and data, analyze the facts, and consider the potential consequences of each option so that we're making an informed decision, so that we're not acting rashly. And here's the next thing, though, that's balanced with trusting our intuition. You know, we need to pay attention to those gut feelings or the intuition. And if your intuition aligns with your rational analysis and values, then it really serves as a valuable guide in making those difficult decisions. Excuse me. I think it's also helpful to engage others who can be subjective and supportive in our process of deciding what to let go of. So as much as we may be able to self-coach, what we also need are those coaches around us, those mentors, those critical friends even, who can hold us to account. So how do you use this to make decisions about what to let go of? And that's where we started after all. As a Myers-Briggs practitioner, I still remember the decision-making sequence they recommend. And it's based on the 16 types, but the preferences that each individual has. And they recommend that you start by using your full senses to look at the facts. So what are the really tangible things that we can get our heads around? And our hands around in some cases. Then we engage intuition to consider the possibilities. So fact first, then look at the possibilities. Then we move into thinking to anticipate logical consequences before deploying feeling to understand the impact on people. And they refer to that as their Z type decision making. So sensing for the facts, intuition for the possibilities, thinking for the logical consequences, and then finally feeling to understand the impact on people when we're making decisions about what to let go of. I find this such a useful sequence because everyone and their preference is included if we're involving other people. But if we're doing this on our own, what we know we're then doing is not skewing the outcome by only favouring our own preference. We're getting to use those preferences that are less strong for us. And although MBTI has its detractors, another part of the MBTI process that makes absolute sense to me is how we use our functions to take in data or make decisions, which are those second two letters. If you're aware of the Myers-Briggs, the first two letters are E or I to denote whether your preference is introversion or extroversion. The second two letters are S or N, denoting whether your preference when you're taking in data is the sensing part, the using everything that you can see, touch, feel, etc., or intuition, whether it's more about the bigger picture. The third letter is either going to be T or F, denoting how you make your decisions, where T is for thinking, so it's purely a cognitive exercise, and F is for feeling, which is where we actually step into the decision and feel it from the inside out almost. The last two letters talk about which of those functions we prefer, the taking in of data or the making decisions. I'm considered an introverted feeling type who sees the realities and needs in the moment and is therefore suited to roles that require adaptability because I can pick up and sense what's needed and adjust, adapt. And that's spot on. That's me to a T. I'm not great with routine or predictability. I prefer to go with the flow a bit. And my dominant function is introverted feeling, which what that means is that I don't show the outside world how I make my decisions. So I can be a bit of an enigma in that sense. And that's because my preference is to step inside the problem, feel it and experience it, make my decision from there, and then come out and say what my decision is. What I don't do particularly well, and in fact in Myers-Briggs terms is referred to as my inferior function, is that I'm really not proficient at extroverting or talking out loud about the logic I'm using. So it's no wonder that I prefer making decisions on my own, but developing my inferior function is part of my growth. So when working as part of a team, I work hard at sharing my process, and I'm getting much better at that. I've learned to talk about my process as it's happening or as I'm using it. And in group situations, that's essential. Probably the main process to be mindful of when decision making or problem solving come to that is to first engage in divergent thinking, literally kind of thinking that takes us in almost opposite directions, to find the creative space before using convergent thinking to bring us to that final decision or solution. So jumping to conclusions stifles that creativity and stops the really good decisions being made. As overthinkers, and many introverts are overthinkers, it can be this latter part of the process that eludes us sometimes. The last letter of my MBTI type is P, meaning that I prefer taking in data to making decisions. So I find it helps me to put a deadline on the decisions I'm making and hold myself accountable. If you think that will be useful for you, then feel free to borrow my last tip. And of course, there are many techniques you can use to help with decision making, like a pros and cons analysis, like decision trees, and of course, the old Marie Kondo style, holding something, being with something, and asking yourself the question, does it bring me joy? I've been using that particular technique more and more, and I think it's as I'm getting older and realize that my time is finite, that I want to do more and keep more of what brings me joy. This also encourages me to use more of my felt sense and intuition, to get out of my own head, because I already spend too much time up there. So it's a blessed relief to get out of my own head. On the whole, I think when it comes to decision making, yes, there are a number of techniques you can use, but I think don't overcomplicate it. So what kind of decision maker are you? Are you keen to get to the decision, any decision being better than nothing? Or do you leave yourself open to the myriad of possibilities and get caught up in it all like I do? As is my wont, I picked a book from the shelf, and it happened to be Melody Beattie's book, Journey to the Heart. Got it here. I let it fall open at a page because that's what I like to do. And this is what it read. The light will illuminate your path. When in doubt, go towards the light. When you get to the fork in the road, choose the way that feels the lightest. The light will take you to the next place. The light will lead you home. Whilst there is so much more that I could say about deciding what to let go of, maybe Melody's passage is the perfect place to end this particular show on. So thank you for letting me share my musings with you. I encourage you to make the decisions that feel the lightest for you. After all, you'll be putting down something, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, but something you've been carrying unnecessarily. And next week, having got our decision making sorted, I'll be exploring the process of letting go. And it's more ritualistic than you might imagine, which I find rather pleasing. So if you want to get hold of me before next week, my email is on the screen now. It's joanna@flourishingintroverts.com. And you'll find me on all social platforms at Flourishing Introverts. So until next week, when we look at the process of letting go, have fun with your decision making and choose whatever feels lightest to you.